Hi, I'm Eleanor Leslie, and I did a project in working with mostly dry. I focused on graphite, ink to pens and brushes, markers, drawing pens, colored pencils, and mixed media. Here are my supplies that I used. I'll go more in depth when we get to the specifics. So I started first with graphite, and for this I used an ebony pencil, a 2H, an HB, an 8B, a 6B, and a regular 2B, 2 HB, Ticonderoga. And then additionally, I had four different types of erasers, a Staedtler white eraser, a pink eraser, art gum, and a kneaded eraser. And I also used a blended stump. I started off my exploration by just swatching the colors and no, the colors, the different hardnesses of the pencils and seeing how they flow, doing different strokes, using straight motions, curve motions, and I did a circle test to see how light and hard they worked. After that, I moved to newsprint and I was looking at how well the pieces erase and how differently they move on this paper. They move a little bit flowier on the newsprint paper. And then in the bottom right corner, you can see I used a little bit of the blended stump to create some shadows. And I did some exploration on brown paper bag. That's where I started first doing erasing, seeing how they worked. And doing different ways to cover areas as well as drawing without moving my wrist. As you can see in the erasers, the Mars eraser didn't do really good on anything other than H and HB pencils, while the gum eraser was good all around. And then I did more studies on pattern paper, which is a little hard to see, in my opinion. I don't know if that's the paper in general or just graphite on the paper. And then I did a study on vellum, which I really liked because the eraser wasn't erasing, it was smudging. So then I started using my finger and the drawing stumps to create designs instead of drawing with the pencils themselves. And this was fun. And then I did a study on colored paper with doing a variety of techniques with different scribbling motions, covering different areas with different hardnesses and erasing. Then we move on to ink, dip pens, and brushes. Here are my materials. I had a variety of different inks of different types. And then I used a synthetic brush, a bamboo nib, a glass pen nib, a bamboo brush, and a metal nib. And this was really fun. I did first a study of how well they write because that is what I have experience with using ink for is writing. And then I went into testing around with the nibs and just drawing with them. They did really eat this paper, and I was using watercolor paper for this. And the bamboo was very scratchy, leaving lots of dry marks, while the metal was like ripping up the paper. The glass, in my opinion, was the best writing tip, but the brushes gave me more variety of marks, and I like those a lot better. And I continued looking at the different types of marks I can make, but this time with a variety of colors and seeing how they blended and how they worked together. So I was just scribbling and layering in ways that felt aesthetical. And then we moved on to working with washes. And this is, I started with full color ink in the colors and went over it with uh, black wash. I'm really happy with how this piece turned out. It was really fun to see how the colors blended and then adding shading and texture with the washes. In contrast, this one, I started with the dark colored wash and added the full color ink over top. And I also like how this piece turns out, but also I just really liked working with ink in general. And then I continued working with the washes and full colors with just little doodles with the different types of materials, as you can see. And I like the mixed one because I used my gold ink there. So it's a little bit shiny, and you can see in the second picture much more. And as I was continuing my doodles with the washes and solid color inks, I kind of started creating monsters and I kind of liked it. So I've created one on construction paper and you can see the ink bled a lot over there. And then one on this pattern paper again, and it's really hard to see. And I think it might just be the paper I picked that causes a problem with that. Moving on to markers and drawing pens. These are materials I used. I used Artex acrylic markers, some Stelabo fine line colors. The I don't This is a brand of alcohol markers that I got off of Amazon for like 20 bucks and they're pretty decent. And then some Crayola washable markers. I started with doing just a study of some blacks. So I have some my base markers here. I also brought in some other black markers like some pens and some fine liner brushes as well. And I was just building up, doing texture, seeing how many designs I could get. I really like the design, the little V's I got from rolling the chisel tip markers. That was a fun thing I discovered. And then I went back and did what I did with colors. And I did lots of blending studies here to see how the colors interacted with each other, if the primary colors could make their secondary colors, or if they were off a little bit, and seeing how that worked. And then with the fine liner Stelbo markers, it was a lot of really hard to build up a lot of colors. So I did hatching, and you do get some good optical blending there. And the Artex markers bled into each other a little bit is the other thing I noticed. And then I tried on acetate, which was a fun experience. I honestly expected all of them to bead up, but they didn't. The Crayola, the alcohol markers, and the acrylic markers worked really well on it, and you got lots of fun effects. The fine liners didn't do as well, and you can see I did smudge tests on them too to see how well they stood up after time. And then I just did continue exploring with the colors on colored paper as well as pattern paper, and then doing some exercises of moving my whole arm instead of just my wrist, and drawing with the pen or marker on an extender in the bottom right. And then, as the prompt said, I started looking into creating textures and feelings with the drawings. So down there you can see like rushing, noisy, crisp, me doing some fuzzy tests, dense, complicated, flowing, and how I achieve those with very different media. Next, moving on to colored pencils. I used Prismacolors, some Crayolas, and then I had these mechanical colored pencils in my backpack that I thought I would try out. And I started out with just my regular color test, seeing how the colors blend into each other, how they layer, and how strong I could get the colors. The Crayola pencils were a little dry feeling, but gave decent pigment. And the Prismacolors were very smooth. It felt like drawing with a pastel, like an oil pastel more than a pencil compared to the Crayola. And then the big ones, I didn't have a wide variety of colors, so uh, I tried my best to do some color grades there. And then I tried the Crayola and the Prismacolor on black and gray tone paper. And as you can see, the Prismacolor showed up way more than the Crayola because it has more pigmentation and it just writes better and it builds up color better. So that's what I learned from that. I continued my tests onto newsprint and colored paper, and Prismacolor continues to be more vibrant in all of these tests. And then I went on to vellum, and you can see here I created another creature. I was having fun making creatures, and I was doing the test between the Crayola and the Prismacolor again, and you can see in the background how you can see the texture of the paper when the light shows through it. So my artist spotlight is Sid Garrison, and the quote from the book is, "Color provides a feedback loop that sustains me that I don't find without color." And I really agree with that statement, is I have struggle with making art that isn't colorful. And he pushes colored pencils to make his work look like his leather painting work. And here's some of his color pencil work. And here's the work I did inspired by this. And finally, we have mixed media. I used my acrylic markers, the Prismacolors, the alcohol markers, my inks, and some of my graphite for my tests. I just tested how all the pieces interacted, how they overlaid with each other, and how the primaries worked. And then I continued my tests onto colored paper with markers and pencils mainly on there, and then onto this like weaved texture paper I found that was really nice. Using different materials to get similar effects is what I did down there. This is a cardstock colored paper that I used to test the difference between the alcohol markers and the paint markers overlaying each other, as well as a little bit of the ink. And this is ink washes, paint markers, and colored pencil and graphite on newsprint. And I like this creature I made because he kind of blends in with the paper background that I created. And then for my studio reflections, the qualities and characteristics I found that I liked and noticed a lot were the bright, vibrant colors. The variety of textures I got from the papers were really fun. And incorporating the papers in the pieces, like in my little monster who blended into the page, and how well the medias worked together and how I could get them to work well in a fun composition, leading into my last point. What combinations of materials and drawing surfaces do I find most interesting? I like the vellum and acetate. They were materials I had not used before, so they were fun. Colored pencils and paint markers were very satisfying to work with, but I discovered that I really like the feeling of the glass dip pen and writing and drawing with that. And overall, I liked the more expensive materials because they tend to have a better flow and feel to them. And working with more colors compared to limited colors, like I said, when talking about the artist spotlight, I feel like working with limited colors kind of stops my creativity. But for some people, limited colors can help push more detail and getting more out of the simplification of that. Though more colors could mean more choices, which may not be best for the first time encounter with a material in a classroom setting. Um, and to continue on that point, I think limited colors are good if you want your students to learn a skill or push a skill further. So building those foundations of how to use the materials. But color can help if you want the students to be more expressive and fulfill a specific prompt that requires more creativity. And for this project, I honestly learned that working with both dry and somewhat wet media interchangeably and at the same time is a really great way to get a variety of materials, and just knowing how they work and what part of them you want to use for the lesson may help. And I think a lot of these things that I used work really well for most ages. I think the glass pen and the metal pen nib are the only things I would really say, and maybe the alcohol markers, I would really say aren't suitable for younger groups. Thank you.